Tonight, the Right to Vote at 16 Act does not pass. Where does that movement go from here? Party commentators will join me to discuss that coming up. Also, Hurricane Fiona and cooperation from various leaders. Charlottetown PEI Mayor Philip Brown will join me to discuss that coming up. Also, a one-on-one with Senator Paula Simons, where she shares why she is concerned about the rising ability to spread various messages via social media. Joining me now are three party commentators. Amanda Alvaro is a Liberal commentator, Mitch Hempel is a Conservative commentator, and Kim Wright is an NDP commentator. Amanda, let's start out with a private member's bill that was put forward in the House of Commons by NDP MP Taylor Bachrach, pushing to lower Canada's voting age to 16. I remember talking with him about it all the way back in May now, and now here we are in September. The bill did not pass. Just under 80 MPs voted for it, well over 200 voted against it. What do you make of, I guess, the amount of MPs who voted for the bill and how part of the Liberal caucus was split on the vote?
Well, I'm a big proponent of lowering the voting age, so I will be on the wrong side of this issue with most of the party. But I think, numbers are rising around this issue, and I think it's one of those issues. I think this is the 11th time that we've tried to lower the voting age since 1970, so it hasn't been without its efforts. But this bill makes a lot of sense to me, despite the fact that it was voted down. It makes a lot of sense because, listen, 16-year-olds, they're working and paying jobs. They're paying taxes. They should have a say in where those taxes are going, among other things. And I read a great report recently that really looked at a number of youth between the ages of, I think, 15 and 18, and they talked to them about their involvement in civic engagement and how critical it is to be engaged at that age, and how hopefully being engaged at a younger age will turn the apathy that we're seeing in federal elections into much more engagement at a younger age. So we're creating a habit that will stay with them through their lifetime. So I could go on and on about this one. I'm not happy that more of the party didn't vote for it, despite the fact that I knew that was going to happen. I hope that those tides will turn.
Mitch, Amanda alluded to how many times this has tried to have been done in the past. Obviously, MP Taylor Bachrach, he put this forward. He worked with some organizations, Vote 16 Canada, Children First Canada, lots of prominent organizations on children's rights in Canada. You're a Conservative commentator. Not one Conservative MP voted for this bill. What do you make of that? And what do you make of how the Conservative Party has addressed this issue?
Well, I think if more teenagers were as well informed as you, Wyatt, it would have passed overwhelmingly. That having been said, this might have been the first time the Conservatives voted against their own self-interest. We had a really interesting poll from Angus Reid that came out this week that said Pierre Poilievre is the most popular leader among men under the age of 35 by quite a bit. So I don't know. I'm generally speaking against lowering the voting age. We have a certain age of majority for a reason, with a number of things you're allowed to participate in broader society. Everything from getting your full driver's license, to drinking, smoking, all these wonderful things that people do in university. Of course, not me. So I
never, Mitch, never.
But listen, I'm not shocked that the vote turned out the way it did. It's one of those fun things to talk about on Parliament Hill, I guess. It doesn't really echo that much out here, unless I guess you're in the halls of a high school.
And Kim, obviously, this is something the NDP has been pushing for a long time. Taylor Bachrach, as I mentioned, when I've spoken to him about his private member's bill, he's been very enthusiastic about it, very enthusiastic that he could try and convince some of his colleagues to vote for this bill. How can the NDP move forward on something that they are so supportive of when their colleagues in the House of Commons, including the government and the opposition, aren't supportive of it?
So let me start with, I believe the phrase vote early, vote often actually comes with a lowered voting age. The earlier you get involved in politics, the more likely you are to stick with politics, civic engagement. We've seen the numbers, we've seen the statistics. Heck, if that wasn't the case, there's a number of parliamentarians who would have never followed that career path from youth wing politics on all the way through to, some of them not having other jobs outside of politics. But I'll leave Pierre Poilievre and Andrew Scheer out of the conversation for tonight. The reality is that just because something didn't pass this time or any of the other time doesn't mean New Democrats give up. In fact, we've been pushing for years. We pushed for years on legalization of marijuana. We've pushed on daycare. We've pushed on pharmacare and dental care. And sometimes those things take a little bit longer of time, but we finally get there. And hopefully, those who we collaborate with in the community and in halls of power will see that this is the way to go forward. And the more that we engage people at an earlier age, it does help get them involved civically longer term. And I don't buy this notion that you have to be past a certain age requirement to be civically minded or not. There are a lot of people who are 47, 48, 49 who, frankly, I don't know that they should have the agency to vote because they're really less apathetic than I was as a 13, 14, 15, 16-year-old. So I don't think anyone of an age bracket has the market. But for anybody who's watching this and is disheartened that you don't get a full vote, that doesn't mean you don't get a full participation. And get in there, get active, get engaged on this issue and any other issue that you're passionate about.
It is worth noting, somewhat interestingly, that I believe every single party represented on this panel tonight allows those under the age of 18 to participate in party elections.
That's right.
They'll take their money for a membership, but not to.
Except in Amanda's case, she will no longer take your money for.
That is true.
but I guess. Sorry, Kim, go ahead.
They should get involved in leaderships and campaigns, and there's all sorts of things that are happening in your communities and in your parties of choice, and keep being active and push those people who've got sort of old fogey ideas out of the way.
Hey, I'm perfectly committed to my old fogey ideas.
And I want to get to Hurricane Fiona, but the point Mitch raised is kind of an interesting point that I want to get to Amanda on is, I mean, like all of the major parties in the House of Commons allow people under the age of 18 to vote in party membership elections. So, I mean, what do you make of that? And why can young people vote in party membership elections, but not in general elections?
That's a very good question that somebody needs an answer to. I agree. If you can vote for who the next leader of the party will be, and again, as I mentioned, if you're working and paying taxes, you should have a say in where those taxes are going. And that happens at the age of 16. So it makes perfect sense to me that if you're perfectly capable, as qualified by the parties, to select a leader, you're perfectly capable of holding a job and paying taxes for those jobs, that you should also be considered to have the competency to make those choices in a general election. Again, I'm super supportive of that, and I hope that my party will follow suit eventually.
And I want to do one more round on Hurricane Fiona as it relates to kind of the response from various leaders, whether it be provincial or federal, the Prime Minister being in Atlantic Canada these past few days, various premiers, the Premier of Newfoundland and the Premier of Nova Scotia being very involved on the ground with some of those efforts, the Premier of Prince Edward Island as well, to rebuild, obviously, after the devastation left by Hurricane Fiona. Mitch, what do you make of all of the collaboration amidst these leaders during what is obviously a challenging time for Atlantic Canada?
I mean, it is a little bit to be expected given the severity of the devastation we've been dealing with. Some of the scenes from the west coast of Newfoundland in particular have just been like just truly jaw-dropping. Like we lost Teacup Rock on the north coast of PEI, which I think is a landmark we'll all miss. That having been said, we've had some interesting friction, I think, from some of the premiers over the course, especially Premier Houston, over the course of the last couple of days, including visiting one final indignity on the well past its best before date ArriveCAN app, with electricity workers from Maine struggling to cross the border into the Maritimes as a result. That having been said, Usually this brings out some of the best in our politicians. It likely will again in this case and continue to. I think we've all got friends and prayers and thoughts going out to the East Coast to try to help them pick up from a pretty devastating weekend.
And Kim, obviously, it's unfortunate to say, but there has been some like politicization of the issue. What do you make of that? And again, same question. What do you make of the collaboration amidst various leaders?
Well, you hope in times of devastation, times of grief, times of trauma, like a hurricane happening, that people can check their egos out the door and figure out a way to rebuild community. That is the best hope of all of it. Sure, there's going to be photo ops. Sure, there's going to be people who say, it's all politicking. I don't buy that. Yes, there's some of it, but really fundamentally, if you see the devastation, you see that PEI, has shifted most of its, it's down to bedrock in certain places. How that will rebuild, the infrastructure required. Some of these structures, these are people's homes. And these are communities that have been devastated. So I think people need to remember that when we sort of think, oh, it's all politics. No, it's a community. It's where people live. It's where we should see the best in Canadians coming together. It also is a reminder of how fragile our infrastructure is. How do we go forward? How do we, not to steal a Liberal phrase, but build back better? In a meaningful way, not just sloganeering. And we need to have a rethink about, in particular in coastal communities, what does that look like? How do we make sure that we, as weatherproof as we can, as natural disaster proof as we can, recognizing that when you have a hurricane like Fiona, it's really hard to imagine how to completely weatherproof for that. But we do know some of the things that need to get done. And having those physical infrastructures and community infrastructure start to be put into place, that's going to be the next step and the next challenge going forward.
And Amanda, just before we conclude, I guess final word to you on the Hurricane Fiona front.
Well, I think I build on what Kim and Mitch have said, and that's, sometimes the worst conditions bring out the best in our politicians, thank goodness. There are thousands of people obviously without power, people who have lost their homes, who are displaced from their homes. There's a monumental cleanup effort underway, and the only way to deal with that, and then all of the echo effects, which include things like job losses and business losses and the economic impact of that, and the medical expenses, and the lists go on, requires a coming together of sorts. So again, sometimes those worst conditions really do bring out the best. And I think we're seeing that collaboration between the federal government, the provinces, all of the military effort underway, and Canadians who have come to the table in monumental ways with their Red Cross donations, which are, of course, being matched.
Okay, political commentators Amanda Alvaro, Mitch Hempel, and Kim Wright, thanks to you all for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Joining me now from Charlottetown City Hall in Prince Edward Island is Charlottetown's Mayor, Philip Brown. Mayor, thanks so much for making the time. Let's start out. Charlottetown, obviously, like many places in Atlantic Canada, lots of devastation from Hurricane Fiona. What is the latest on the ground in Charlottetown?
Well, Wyatt, it's an honor for me to be on your show, your podcast. It's great to see young persons, people like yourself, getting involved in reporting the news and getting the news out. So, as you know, the last time we had a hurricane at this magnitude was in 2003, Hurricane 1. I was on council at the time as a city councillor and remembered the devastation from that storm. Plus, there was a storm surge on the south side of where Charlottetown lies, and there was a lot of water damage and a lot of damage to our waterfront. This time for Hurricane Fiona, the storm surge switched and went up to the north. So it hit our beautiful beaches of Brackley, Stanhope, Dalvey, and the remnants of what's left, they've wiped out the sand dunes. All that remains is structures that were used as stairways to the upper parking lot. In Charlottetown, lots of trees down, and old trees. We have approximately 11,000 municipal trees in the city of Charlottetown. What number were destroyed by this hurricane? We're still doing a count, but it was significant. And significantly, it damaged lots of areas across the island. As for Charlottetown, the cleanup has been the priority and is still the priority, because we have to clear the streets in order to get the electrical providers into these neighborhoods so that they can put up new poles, install new poles for delivering electricity to homes. Telecommunication providers like Bell Alliant, Eastlink, and TELUS are also in need of getting that cleanup done so that we can get this city back up to some sense of normalcy. So, as you know, living through COVID-19, we had one whammy after another. So this is another whammy in the side. But you know what? Islanders, people of Charlottetown, have taken up the effort to sustain ourselves. And again, I've said this many times, Wyatt, climate change is only a big topic when a disaster happens. And, it requires action, especially from people like yourself, young people that understand that in order to save this earth, we have to take baby steps, small steps, giant footsteps to reduce, and I mean seriously reduce, our carbon footprint. So efforts have started to clean up our city, and it's progressing as we speak. In the nighttime, I noticed that Fredericton, New Brunswick, their electrical company is over here. They're already in bed because they're up early in the morning. They don't work at night because of safety issues.
And when you look at some of the biggest impacts on the residents of Charlottetown, I'm sure internet connectivity issues is probably one thing, hydro is probably another. What's the latest on that?
Electricity is slowly coming back. My wife and I just got our electricity this afternoon, and that's after 5 days. There will be many parts in Charlottetown that may not get it for another 2 or 3 days, but on the island, going east or west, it could be a week, 10 days plus, because the infrastructure was severely jeopardized and compromised by this ferocious hurricane. And as I said in many other interviews, Wyatt, the impact of Hurricane Fiona was 2, 3, 4 times harder than Hurricane Juan. And talking about internet, talking about Wi-Fi, our cell towers, not one fell down. But you know what? Because they don't have backup generators to keep the electricity going, that's why the Wi-Fi is failing. And I believe the provincial government of Nova Scotia is calling on CRTC, the Canadian Radio Television Communication, Telecommunications Commission, to ensure that Wi-Fi cell phone providers have backup generators to ensure that Wi-Fi connection continues and cell phone connection continues during days after or post-hurricane, post-tornado, post-disastrous natural disasters.
And when you look at the level of preparedness for a disaster such as this to take place, obviously, you alluded to it in regards to climate change. Climate change is something that happens, and obviously we have to take as much action as possible to prevent climate change from happening. But in terms of the actual hurricane itself, in the city of Charlottetown across Prince Edward Island, what are you aware of in terms of what preparations were done leading up to when the disaster Hurricane Fiona took place? And are you personally, as mayor of Charlottetown, satisfied with the level of preparations leading up to the disaster?
We have an EMO team, that's our Emergency Measures Organization team, and there's a provincial team also. We are collaboratively working jointly together to make sure everyone, all the parties are connected. Wyatt, you can do a lot of preparation, and I think there was a lot of preparation in place. People took this hurricane serious. In 2003, we didn't take it serious, and there was significant damage, and there was a significant lag time to get services back up and operating. Then we had Hurricane Dorian in 2019. It wasn't as bad or as severe as Hurricane Juan, but this Hurricane Fiona, was a ferocious and very hard hitting hurricane. So yes, we were prepared, but seniors living in senior homes that lost their power also lost their telephone communications. Some of them still have landlines, if you know what they mean, because most people now, most residents, most citizens are using cell phones. Cell phones were down because they didn't have backup generators. Internet was down because the router didn't have electricity. So yes, we did learn, and we set up 3 reception centers throughout the city. So they provided internet service, they provided recharging of telephones, laptops, just to get any resident that wanted to go back home. And they probably couldn't get their Wi-Fi, so they were staying at these reception centers, drinking, having a cup of coffee, having a bite to eat. So the volunteers that came out to help at those reception centers were very important part of providing that follow-up service. We didn't have these reception centers back in 2003. So that can be checked out, that box. But in terms of getting out to our new Canadians, we've had some issues where new Canadians don't understand, have still trying to understand about barbecues. Where can you use barbecues? How do you work with generators? Well, look, generators, they produce carbon monoxide. And if you put them in an enclosed area, it will kill people. So there's going to be a learning process that we'll cover or talk about, discuss in the post the debriefing of this hurricane. And we're already taking down these notes to ensure that the next hurricane, which I think will be coming, White, because if we don't do anything to slow down our effect on the climate, we're a port city. Rising sea levels is a constant danger, or posing or danger that could overflow or run through our run from upper water, take in terms of its effect on the waterfront and going up further into the city center. These are issues that have to be part of the debriefing. But Wyatt, one thing for sure, we'll always be learning, and we'll always do something better the next time. But let's try to mitigate those next times by concentrating on climate resiliency, addressing climate change, by using more efforts, looking at more efforts to reduce our carbon footprint. That is electrification of public transit, the purchase of more EVs, e-bikes, using solar panels, geothermal heating systems. We can do a lot more, and we have to do a lot more.
Okay, Charlottetown, Prince Edward Island Mayor Philip Brown. Mayor, thanks so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Wyatt, and stay safe.
Thank you. Online media has shaped the way that many things in this country now unfold. Now, that is obviously seen as a good thing in many respects, but it has also allowed it easier to spread hate. Now, joining me now to discuss that is Senator Paula Simon. Senator, thanks so much for joining me. I do want to start out with a Bill C-11, obviously a piece of legislation that is based off of the modified Bill C-10. What do you make of how Bill C-11, the process behind Bill C-11, how that's developed? And I guess more specifically, just looking at the rise in online media and just the rise in social media in general, do you see that as a good thing or a bad thing? How do you balance the two perspectives?
That's a really good question. I mean, I was a journalist for 30 years before I joined the Senate, and I was what you would call an early adopter of social media. I've been on Twitter almost as long as you've been alive. And so I was, early to the game, and I was very optimistic. I think, idealistic about the idea of giving voice to the people, not having gatekeepers, not having a, big media hegemony control what people could see and hear. The challenge is that just like when Gutenberg invented the printing press, it led basically to the Protestant Reformation and Civil War across Europe. As soon as you give voice to people, you have a cacophony, and it's not always easy to tell whose voice you should listen to. So I think some of the early optimism about all of the democratization of voice on the internet has been a bit tempered over the years. Now, Bill C-11, a lot of people think it's a censorship bill, that it's going to allow the government to say, that's not true. C-11 does something quite different. It brings broadcasters who are not broadcasters, so over-the-top streamers like Netflix, Disney, Spotify, and YouTube, under the authority of the CRTC. I'm not wholly happy with that, but I understand the government's logic. And I don't think there are many people who object to the idea of making huge companies like Apple and Prime and Disney contribute to Canadian production. The problem is, does C11 monkey with the algorithms in order to, promote Canadian content in a way that is actually detrimental to online digital producers like yourself? I mean, somebody who is naive about this might think, oh, well, Wyatt Sharp should love C11 because it will privilege Canadian content and it'll get Wyatt in front of more Canadian eyeballs. The problem is that algorithms are smart and stupid at the same time. And if the algorithm is constantly serving you Canadian content you don't want, and you don't click it, then the algorithm goes, oh, I guess this Canadian content must suck, and I guess nobody wants to look at it, which is not the message you want to give to the algorithm.
And on Bill C11 in particular, obviously there's lots of arguments that even you've just presented, and balancing those two perspectives of good and bad on Bill C11. But looking at the rise in online media more broadly, the easy ability now to share your content, videos, in my case, interviews, but in other people's cases, it could be, a video about a very random thing and it could get tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of views. One thing that could be seen as a benefit or a negative towards the usage of social media and of online media. What do you make of how easy it is now to get those videos in front of people? I mean, there are barriers in some cases like algorithms, etc., but it is still relatively easy if you have content of some sort to push and get it out to people.
Yeah, and I must be a hypocrite because I use it all the time. I made a speech in the Senate yesterday that was a tribute to a little boy named Ben Stelter, who died of cancer, but who before his death had become sort of an unofficial mascot to the Edmonton Oilers and really gave the city a boost during the playoff run. Well, I gave the speech in the Senate where 100 people heard it. And then I shared it on Twitter, and it's had almost 30,000 views on Twitter. So I use my Twitter channel, my YouTube channel, my podcast, my Facebook page all the time to share the work that I'm doing in the Senate and to try to teach Canadians more about the Senate. So when I'm doing it, I think it's great. When hate mongers are doing it, I'm a little less enthused in the fact that any neo-Nazi or conspiracy theorist or QAnon follower can get hundreds of thousands of views on Facebook, on Telegram, on Reddit, on 4chan, which is probably the worst of them, is really disquieting. And the problem is, I don't think it's actually people in your generation. I think you and your friends are incredibly media literate, and I think you're probably better at sorting out, what's garbage and what's real. People, I'm not a boomer, I'm a very old Gen Xer, but I think for boomers and people older than boomers, they see it online and they grew up with television. They grew up believing that if they saw it on TV, it was true and authoritative. And so when you put information in front of them, they're not always very good at sorting out what is clearly fake or what is clearly hate and what is legitimate. And the problem is that as mainstream media organizations have collapsed, as the economics of mainstream media has totally been disrupted by digital, it's very hard to know who you should listen to.
Okay, Senator Paula Simon. Senator, thanks so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Wyatt. I hope you will have me on again if I'm not too boring.
Absolutely. Thanks so much.
Thanks.